are incredibly long and will be all over your test. So I have a lot to get through in an hour, and I might go kind of fast. So make sure you're locked in, students. We're back. What up, Quandra? You've been to every single one so far. This is such a delight. My next lock-in chat, nice. Yeah, also feel free to like ask questions. I can't always see the chat screen, so make sure they're appropriate, but ask each other questions. You can answer each other's questions. You can encourage each other, all of that good stuff. So just a reminder, I have this one today. I have units 7 and 8 on Wednesday at the same time. And then the last 2 sessions that I'm going to do are just for my Ultimate Review Packet subscribers. So one is going to be entirely on Unit 9, and then I'll just do like a question and answer. I can answer whatever questions you have for like the last 20 minutes of that. And then the Wednesday before your AP test, I'm going to do a whole writing lab. So if you want to do or be a part of those, you have like I'm only going to give it to my Ultimate Review Packet subscribers. So I'll send the link in that. So consider whether or not you want to get that now. That also has exclusive videos for my units 6, 7, 8, and 9 review. So like the ones that I post on YouTube, it's those same ones, but just the second half of the course is only available to my Ultimate Review Packet subscribers. So gotta throw that out there because, yeah, it's a thing that I do. Don't be nervous to take the exam. Y'all are going to do great. The fact that you are literally showing up here right now on a Wednesday or on a Monday, 2 weeks before the exam means that you care more than most people and you will do wonderfully. As I always tell my students, I actually say this to them in real life, before they take any test or any quiz, I have them turn to a peer and say, "You can do it. I believe in you." And then they say, "You can do it. I believe in you." And then everyone's all hyped up before they take their exam. So, y'all can do it. I believe in you. All right, it's 6 o'clock. It's like high time that we get started because there's so much to do. Let's go. Students, first phones away. Throw them across the room until the very end of this video. You might want it back when I have on the screen everything that you need to know for units 5 and unit 6, but like literally don't have it next to you. Throw it across the room, grab a pencil, grab a paper, lock in, let's go. Great. My overarching theme for units 1 through 5 again, is that these early modern Europeans, once educated, challenged traditionally held sources of power. We saw that play out with the Protestant Reformation against the Catholic Church. We saw that play out with the Scientific Revolution against science and also kind of the Catholic Church, and the Enlightenment against political power. And now we're definitely going to see that play out in the French Revolution because the Enlightenment had spent enough decades taking root throughout the average European society. They're like, maybe this monarch doesn't have my best interest in mind. Maybe he doesn't have the consent of the governed. Maybe I should do a thing that overthrows this person and removes him from power. Because Unit 5, y'all, is mainly about the French Revolution. Let's go. Dun, dun, dun. We do need to start out with what's going on in Britain, but here are first my guiding questions. So 2 major questions for this unit that are my overarching things that I always come back to. What were major causes of conflict in Europe during the 1700s? So this is going to play out like within countries and also among countries. So not only internal conflict within a country, but also external conflict. And this historical thinking skill is causation, right? So what are causes and effects of a specific event? And then of course, because the major thing here in Unit 5 is the French Revolution. How did the French Revolution and its effects change European politics and society? So we are looking at CCOT for our historical thinking skill here, continuity and change over time. What were some things that drastically changed in Europe as a result of the French Revolution? And then what were some things that actually maybe stayed the same, except for we're mainly going to focus on changes. Let's go. Contextualization. We'll always start there. So with Unit 5, the time period is still 1648 to 1815. And this contextualization leading up to what's happening in Europe, which is really Britain is coming into power and France is having a revolution, is the Enlightenment. So I'm not going to go super deep into that because my last video covered that, but just a reminder that these early modern Europeans are becoming educated. These Enlightenment philosophers are trying to figure out the natural laws that dictate human society. You have Enlightenment philosophers in England start to advocate for this idea of a social contract. How do we interact with each other? this state of nature. How do people act in the absence of government? What's the purpose of government? And then in France, you have some more radical Enlightenment philosophers. You have people like Voltaire critique the Catholic Church, critique the monarchy, get jailed a bunch of times. You have Rousseau, who's all into exploratory child education. He says man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. And Diderot, right? He's trying to compile all of the known information in the world so that everyone, if you have access to education, maybe you can actually start to critically think about how you interact with the world and then challenge the things that you disagree with. So the Enlightenment has taken root across Europe, and England and France and Spain, and also basically the Habsburgs versus the non-Habsburgs, or the Catholics versus the non-Catholics, tend to get in fights with each other a lot. New World colonies still exist, and there is increasing commercial and political rivalries over the wealth that is coming back to Europe from these American colonies. And it tends to fall along the lines of like the Protestant non-Habsburgs still fighting against the Catholic Habsburgs. So you have like the entrenched Catholic monarchies in Spain and France fighting against Britain and eventually Prussia, is how this plays out in this unit. So a big thing that you need to know here is that Britain becomes the dominant power in Europe in the 1700s. So if we go way back, we're going to look at this map. If we go way back to the Renaissance, when the Renaissance happened, power started to consolidate in Italy, because that is where those trade routes connected to the rest of like Africa and Asia. They all came through Italy. So wealth started to get concentrated in Italy. And then once the hemispheres were connected, once Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, power moves from the Mediterranean region to the Atlantic region. And then that is where it had been located for a long time. And France and Spain became extremely wealthy off of their New World colonies and off of their financial policies. But it's in the 1700s that Britain surpasses them as the dominant political and economic powerhouse in Europe. And again, it's because of their control of trade and because of the colonies that they have in the Americas. I'm not. The 7 Years' War happens. It has causes that are complicated that you genuinely don't need to know about for the AP test. But if I were to TLDR, if I were to summarize the 7 Years' War, Britain, Portugal, and Prussia join forces and fight against all of these other countries that are in blue here. So like mainly France and Spain, and essentially like the Catholic Habsburgs are fighting against Britain and Prussia. This plays out in Europe and also in the Americas. It plays out in the Americas as the French and Indian War. And this honestly is the first world war. We just don't really talk about it in that way. It ends with Britain and Prussia winning. This is great for Britain and Prussia because that, again, kind of elevates their status in Europe. But also, this leads to the American Revolution, because Britain's like, hey, American colonists, we just waged this war to protect our land in the Americas. You now owe us money. We're going to tax your tea and also your paper. And the American colonists were like, no. And then France and Spain were like, yes, go America. We're going to help you take down Britain because they just took us down. So 7 Years' War, Britain and Prussia wins, and Britain and Prussia both win. But then that also ultimately leads to the American Revolution, which kind of weakens Britain, but not really all that much. What else do I need to talk about here before jumping right into the French Revolution? That was all really fast, so I'm going to go see if you have anything. Nope, you're great. Love it so much. Here we go. So Britain is becoming a dominant power in Europe, period. France undergoes a revolution in the late 1700s. You need to know about the long-term and short-term causes of the French Revolution. Long-term, well, social and political problems have existed in France for a long time. The monarch has all of the power and all of the wealth. And if we're looking at this image here, this is supposed to represent the estates system. France has been socially divided up into 3 estates. So you have the first estate, the second estate. Those two together are going to be like the nobility and the clergy. And then you have the third estate, the working class, the peasants, who make up the majority of the population in France, and they pay all of the taxes. So, oppressed peasants, never really a good thing when you're thinking about world history. Oh my gosh, my number one rule If the apocalypse were to ever happen and you were to emerge as the inevitable leader of your tribe that has arisen after the apocalypse, like, right, we're like all in this like a barren wasteland kind of thing, you emerge as the leader, population starts to grow again. Literally, my one rule is that you need to keep the peasants on your side because peasant revolts are the real deal. The lower class always outnumbers the upper class. And when you give them enough reason to revolt, they will revolt against you. So the Enlightenment had taken root in France at this point, and people were like, yeah, this king like doesn't have consent of the governed. He's saying that he's ruling by divine right, and I disagree with that. Also, why does he have so much money and we have like no money? Also, France, why did you just like spend all of this money to go help these American colonists wage a war against Britain? But you're not just going to like support people within your land. That doesn't make sense. And then you throw a famine into the top of all of that mix, and you have some angry, hangry oppressed presence, and they're ripe to overthrow their government. French Revolution occurs in two stages. There's a moderate or liberal phase, and then there is a radical phase. Now, the question that I always really like to ask my students when we're going over this in class is, to what extent was the French Revolution successful? Because if you look at the moderate phase, they were successful in creating what they originally intended to create. They didn't want the king to have total power anymore. And the moderate phase of the French Revolution resulted in the king signing a document that declared France to be a constitutional monarchy, right? So his power is now going to be checked by a constitution. He can't just do whatever he wants anymore and rule absolutely. So for the people in France, getting King Louis XVI to sign this was huge. Also, they abolished hereditary privileges, which means that nobles who kind of got some cool perks before can't get those cool perks anymore because they're trying to bring about more social equality for the people in France. And lastly, they limited the power of the Catholic Church. So if you're looking at these three things that occurred in the moderate phase of the French Revolution, you could argue that this is actually really successful. King's power is now checked. Nobles' power is checked. Things are becoming more economically, things in theory will become more economically stable. And the Catholic Church can't like reign supreme anymore. But it doesn't end there. Oh, no. The French Revolution becomes radical because I believe, is it Edouard Drumont who says, if the king is right, then the king is alive, then the revolution is wrong? Is it Drumont who says that? No, I think that he's later on. Don't write down Drumont. But essentially, these like radical Jacobins, this new faction that emerges, is like, yeah, we need to actually, in order to progress as a country, in order for this revolution to be successful, we need to actually make sure that we completely get rid of any of the ancien regime, any of this old regime, this old ruling class, because we need to start over fresh. So, led by Maximilien Robespierre, he institutes the Reign of Terror, which is exactly what it sounds like. And you remember all of this from your history class, because I feel like probably the best thing that your teacher was most excited about teaching this year was the French Revolution. So he goes around and guillotines everyone. You get a guillotine, you get a guillotine, you get a guillotine. Any political opponents of the revolution, anyone who spoke out against the revolution, they were all beheaded. Also, the guillotine is a democratic killing machine. This is a fun fact, because if you were alive at the time, and you wanted, oh my gosh, I have so many fun facts about the French Revolution. If we have time at the end, someone please remind me to talk about blood. Literally, please remind me to talk about blood. Okay. Back in the day, if you were like of nobility, you would get your head cut off with a sword. But when you were not in the nobility, if you were just like an average person who had committed treason, you'd get your head cut off with an axe. So it was like actually a lot harder to do. It wasn't as clean, and it was like way bloodier. So now the fact that the guillotine is killing everyone equally makes it a democratic killing machine. Anyway, that was a rant. Maximilien Robespierre starts to fix prices to make sure that like inflation isn't happening kind of rampantly. But the other key thing that happens and also that people are buying within France, so they're supporting their own new economy. And the other key thing that is part of this radical phase of the French Revolution is this focus on de-Christianization. So rather than kind of, again, if we're wanting to remove all of these like old traditional sources of power, we're going to behead the monarch, we're going to behead Marie Antoinette, we are going to try to get rid of the Catholic Church as much as possible. So Jacques René Hébert was the guy who practiced de-Christianization, and this is where we get like a new revolutionary kind of cult of the supreme being emerges, and a new calendar emerges that isn't based on like a 7-day calendar, or 7-day week, it's based on a 10-day week. And that's where, you get this thing later on called the Thermidorian reaction, because it happens in the month of Thermidor. So there are these policies to try to, again, remove all of these traditional held sources of power. So we see that with beheading Louis and Marie Antoinette. We see that with getting rid of the church. Ooh, I also want to talk about this photo here, because another key component of the French Revolution in general is that women are active agents in history, and it is written down, and it is very common throughout the French Revolution. So this picture here is depicting the Poissardes, the fish women, who marched on Versailles, right, which is 15 miles outside of the city of Paris. And they demand that King Louis and Marie Antoinette, while the French Revolution is starting, can't live in Versailles anymore. They have to actually go back to Paris and stay in the Tuileries, which is like downtown area. And the women are the one like responsible for going to get all of them. They also like behead a bunch of guards and like stick their heads on pikes as they're marching back to Paris. So women are really active agents in the French Revolution, and that is incredibly important. So the French Revolution was successful in its moderate phase, and then gets real crazy in its radical phase, and everyone starts dying. And also they're like, hey, but these revolutionary changes are cool. We like the idea that like we don't have a king anymore and that it's led by the people. We should take these changes elsewhere, which is what is in the CED called levée en masse, which just means like national armies are raised and conscripted within France to go take these French Revolution changes to neighboring countries to show them that other people can do it as well. Ooh, I know I'm really fast. Again, I'm going to spend more time talking about the Industrial Revolution in this video, also because I'm sure you know a lot about this. This was a DBQ last year, which no one was expecting. So impact of the French Revolution, right? So these revolutionaries start to try to send out these revolutionary ideas and bring it to other countries. But also, France has some colonies in the Americas that are made up of predominantly like enslaved people who are producing so much money for France on these sugar plantations. So the rallying cry of these revolutionaries in France was liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood. They're successful in their revolution, great. They've achieved their liberty, equality, and brotherhood. And then these enslaved Haitians, who are technically part of the French Empire because it's a French colony, are like, hey, liberty, equality, and brotherhood, does that also apply to me as an enslaved person? And France was like, no, it does not. And Napoleon was like, no, it definitely does not. So this ultimately culminates in the enslaved Haitians fighting for independence of what becomes the Republic of Haiti. So this is a colony called Saint-Domingue at the time. This Haitian Revolution was led by Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Those are like the two major ones that you should know. And they bring, right, these revolutionary French ideas into the colony. They say, we don't want to be enslaved anymore. We want to be independent. And in 1804, they end up successfully becoming independent. And the main factor here that allows them to defeat Napoleon's gigantic army that he sends to Haiti is the fact that the Haitians are immune to yellow fever and the Europeans are not. So disease plays a huge role in this, and that wipes out a ton of Europeans who are coming to conquer. But Haiti ultimately becomes independent. This is the first successful slave revolt in the Americas, and they become independent in 1804. If you've taken AP World before this, or if you've taken world history before this, hopefully you know something about the Haitian Revolution, because, oh, I love studying that. So in the wake of the French Revolution, a 5-man directory rules over France. They're really weak. They're not strong. They're not doing a good job. Napoleon was this general who started to gain more power and influence as the French Revolution was progressing. And he ends up seizing power, throws a coup d'etat, takes over the 5-man directory, and crowns himself emperor. We'll just say that. So Napoleon is a very controversial figure in history in general. And he does some things that really support the revolution, but he also does things that really curtail or go against what the revolution was for. So he does some good things that French people are on board with, And then he does some bad things that are like, Napoleon, we just like fought to not do this anymore. And I'm sure your teachers like to think, is Napoleon a friend or a foe of the French Revolution? So what I have here are some facts about what he did when he came into power. And I want you to characterize it into, this is a thing that upholds the ideals from the French Revolution, or this is a thing that curtails or takes away from things that were in the French Revolution. So you can make that in your notes right now while I kind of go through some of these things. He makes a bunch of domestic reforms that I'm not going to talk about. He creates an education system called lycées. So he starts to create like mandated school for certain people, which I will stop there. He starts creating mandated school for certain people. He creates a civil code, which is a law system. And actually, this civil code is modeled by a lot of neighboring countries after, he tries to like take over all of Europe. He also institutes a meritocracy, which means that people are promoted based on merit, based on what you are able to accomplish rather than who your parents are. If you were watching my last video, I talked about Peter I of Russia, Peter the Great of Russia. He also instituted a meritocracy. So that's just like a fun little connection in your brain. You're promoting people like in the military, for example, because they're really good at being in the military, not because like their dad was good at being in the military. He changes and curtails a lot of the rights that women had fought to achieve within the French Revolution. He passes the Concordat of 1801, which reestablishes France's standing with the Catholic Church and reestablishes the importance of the Catholic Church. He has insane military tactics. He actually ushers in a new generation of warfare. I don't need to get super into that, but he is a very brilliant military leader. And then again, as he's trying to conquer all of Europe, that is then sharing his new military tactics with all of Europe. And he promotes a lot of nationalism within France, but then also as he's conquering these other nearby countries, there are nationalist responses that serve to unite people in the wake of these Napoleonic wars. So some of those are good. Some of those are clearly good. Some of those are clearly bad. And then some of them can fall in the middle, and that's okay. So Napoleon, I don't know why I don't have this on here. Napoleon then tries to conquer all of Europe. And Napoleon is really successful in controlling a lot of Europe and then setting up this gigantic barricade against Britain through like the continental system. And then Napoleon sets his eyes on Russia and is like, let's take over Russia. It's the last stronghold. And then the Russians do this really brilliant scorched earth tactic in which they just like burn all of their land and then retreat further into Russia. And Napoleon's like, I have a big ego. Let's follow you into Russia. And then winter happens, and then that's very bad. Anyway, Napoleon is defeated, is exiled the first time to Elba, which is an island off the coast of Italy, which is not a good idea. You are telling me, European leaders, you are telling me that someone who just almost successfully conquered a continent, you're just going to move him to like an island off the coast of Italy? That is really dumb. Napoleon comes back to Europe, rules for 100 days, almost conquers a lot of Europe again, and then is finally defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, where he is then sent to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena, which is where he dies. So after the wake of those Napoleonic Wars, here's the first thing. If I'm going back to my original statement about is the French Revolution successful? French Revolution, moderate phase, successful. Radical phase, everyone dies, not very successful. And then Napoleon comes in and conquers everything, also maybe not very successful. But then what do they do after they exile Napoleon again? They're like, maybe having a monarch wasn't a bad idea. What if we just reestablished the Bourbon monarchy? So like they went through all of that fighting to reestablish a monarch from the same family tree of the one that they beheaded to start the French Revolution. Anyway, 1815, Congress of Vienna happens. This conservative leader named Clemens von Metternich says, hey, European leaders, we almost just got conquered by this one guy, Napoleon. We don't want anything like that to happen again. So what can we do to restore this balance of power in Europe? How can we make sure that one country in Europe is not gaining too much power compared to its neighboring countries? Because that was almost really bad. So this conversation about what does it mean to restore a balance of power starts in Europe. And in the early 1800s, Clemens von Metternich and his other European leaders that he's meeting with, they say, we need to return to traditional values. We need to return to the status quo. We need to return to monarchy, and we need to return to Christianity. And that is their answer to this question. And that also sparks many revolutions to come in the 1800s. Last thing I'll talk about in this unit before I wrap everything up. Romanticism also emerges during this time. I mentioned that this last time. Religion says that truth comes from God. The Enlightenment says that truth comes from reason. And Romanticism says that truth comes from emotion. The Romantic movement and Romanticism in general is going to be all over your AP test, which I love because I love romantic art. This picture is Liberty Leading the People by Jacques-Louis David. This picture, like, it is liberty leading the people. It is an ideal leading the people. It is a reliance on emotion that is leading the people. It is not this rational, empirical thought. It is like this inner emotion that is inspiring you to do things. So Romanticism, we'll talk about in this unit, and then also I think in the next couple of units as well. It challenges this reliance on reason and rationalism. They're like, whoa, you know what? We've thought too much about our thinking. What if we just like rely again on our emotions? And that is what the Romantic movement is. We see this occur with religious revival. So specifically, it's during this time that John Wesley forms Methodism as like a religious response to this fact of like the cold, hard truth of the Enlightenment. No, like let's actually like rely on our spirit and rely on our emotions and rely on our senses again. And let's have this personal relationship with God. So we see that happen during the Romantic movement. To sum it all up, Unit 5, I did that so fast. Way to go, Miss Poole. Economically, commercial rivalries influenced diplomacy and warfare among European states in the early modern era. So they are competing for money. That's going to have them sometimes work together, sometimes not work together. And it ultimately ends with England as the dominant power in Europe. Dutch are still really important because they're still controlling trade in Southeast Asia. But Britain is ascendant during this time period. They become the dominant power in Europe in the 1700s. Politically, Britain emerges as the dominant power in Western Europe, and Prussia emerges as the dominant power in the East, especially because they helped Britain win that whole 7 Years' War thing. France's revolution was debatably successful, but led to the rise, dominance, and defeat of Napoleon. In the wake of Napoleon, nationalism grew across Europe, and European leaders convened at the Congress of Vienna in order to restore a balance of power and retain traditional conservative values. And culturally, Romantics respond to the cold, hard logic and reason of the Enlightenment by exploring emotions, which led to a revival of public expression of emotions and feelings. Beautiful. I'm going to take, like a 2-minute break, answer whatever questions you have, and then we'll pick up with Unit 6. Sherman and Peabody, there's stuff about the Reign of Terror. That's so delightful. Yeah, there are so many fun facts about the French Revolution. Oh, I'll just share my blood fact now while we're taking a break. Okay. Oh my gosh. So you know how last unit we talked about the scientific revolution and how people just had kind of a poor understanding about how the body worked? For a very long time in history, Europeans believed that blood had healing powers, and that if you were in the elite class, you had special gifts, and your blood and body therefore had special gifts to bestow upon people. This is, oh my gosh, Emily, you're going on a rant. That's okay. When elite people were beheaded at the Reign of Terror, there would be peasants who would go up with like literally rags and would sop up the blood of like their beheaded people that are there and then drink it because they thought that that could give them some kind of like special perk or special benefit. This is also the reason that we don't have a lot of mummies left in the world today. When the Europeans started conquering and taking over parts of Egypt and like looking for mummies, I mean, this can through all of history, looking for mummies within like the Valley of the Kings area. They thought that like the mummies, the mummified bodies of these elite people would have special healing powers. So they brought back the bodies of mummies, turned some of it into a specific type of brown that was used in a lot of Renaissance paintings, and then also would grind up the mummies, mix it with some alcohol, and sell it as like a cure-all. History's amazing. If I could teach a medical history class, oh, that'd be my dream. Yes, okay, sorry. Now I'll answer your questions. Yes, Quandra, yep. What specific events should we know on the French Revolution? If you know liberal phase, if you know like the moderate / liberal phase and the radical phase and the reign of terror, you're fine. Self-portraits can be romantic, but not necessarily, like, it doesn't have to be a self-portrait for it to be romantic. Neoclassicism, Napoleon was real obsessed with the Roman Empire. That is why like he ruled as first consul eventually, because he wanted to be as associated with Rome as possible. So neoclassicism is this return to like classical Roman art. I thought I had a picture in the slides, but I don't. There is another Jacques-Louis David painting called The Oath of the Horatii, and that is going to be neoclassical. Like if you see any kind of like way updated compared to the Renaissance art that focuses on like Rome or Greece, that's neoclassical. Books and pieces of literature that reflect Romanticism, I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Okay, great. One last sip of water, and then let's go into Unit 6. Okay. Industrialization and its effects. This will be all over your test. If you want to make some kind of cool little chart in your notes right now, I'm going to talk about what the Industrial Revolution is, and then I'm going to talk about political, economics, and social effects of industrialization. And there's a lot that I need to cover. There's so much in Unit 6. Historical thinking skill here would be, again, causation. So why did industrialization happen? What is industrialization? And then what are these three major kind of thematic effects of it? It would be a gift. It would be a gift if there were an LEQ on industrialization, because I feel like y'all would be so successful at that. I'm still hoping for something on women, though. And we'll start to look at short-term and long-term impacts of industrialization. I'm going to briefly cover that in this unit, but we'll see it play more out when we get into our next unit about imperialism and nationalism. So why does the Industrial Revolution start in Britain? Well, all of these reasons. The Enclosure Acts means that more people, land is concentrated in the hands of the wealthy, more people are moving to cities. The Agricultural Revolution means that there's going to be a larger population, increasing population. People are starting to have more of a money-based economy, so people are already used to kind of like these small steps toward capitalism. Their geography is very beneficial. They have a lot of natural waterways, which become very important when you are transporting goods. They're connected to the coast. They're connected to trade to the Americas. And they have iron and coal deposits just naturally within their country. So obviously like favorable climates for that. They have political support in parliament that actually is in contrast with some other countries that are slower to industrialize. Parliament realizes that if they economically support this, they can make a lot of money. And the Enlightenment is like, yeah, let's work really hard and do all these cool things and make money. I want to point out here really important cities that emerge as the start of industrialization: Liverpool and Manchester. And again, that's because those are huge trading hubs where like the trade from the Americas would come to those areas, not necessarily to London, but about halfway up through the British Isles. So you can see Liverpool kind of right in the middle right there. And should be obvious why Britain starts industrialization with the textile industry. I just don't know that everyone always makes that connection. It's because in the Americas, one of their biggest exports was cotton through cotton slave plantations. So as they are starting to ship all of this cotton back to Britain, the British start to figure out faster ways to weave it and then start to build up factories to weave it rather than just people weaving it on their own, which is why the Industrial Revolution starts with textiles, because of cotton from the American plantations. There we go. Industrial revolution happens in two phases. The first phase of industrialization is that people used to make things by hand, but now machines are making things. It is powered by coal and steam, and it starts, like I mentioned, with textiles. And then as that takes root in society, these early industrialists really do a smart job of funneling a lot of their profits back into industry. So their kind of first generation of machines then start to become way better and way more superior because they're taking a lot of the profits that they're making from manufacturing, throwing it back into more industry development, which leads us to the second wave of industrialization, which is you have machines, but now better machines. And also we're using electricity and not just relying on coal or water or steam power. This was also initiated by the Bessemer process, which was a faster way to make steel. So, first wave starts to create some new, good, kind of more mass production. But by the second wave of industrialization, by like the mid 1800s, let's say like 1830s, wow, it had really taken off, and Britain was leading the continent of Europe and also the world in industrialization. And this map is really important because this will show up on your test, I'm sure. Industrialization starts in England, starts in the British Isles, and spreads to the continent in this particular way. So it hops across the pond, very quickly spreads to, again, the Dutch Republic, which has a lot of similarities with England in the way that like they are these kind of Protestants who are a republic. They're not used to like a monarchy. We see it also spread really quickly to Germany, except for in this time it was Prussia. Prussia was leading a lot of modernization and infrastructure and industry development in the modern day Germany. But we see it lag as it spreads to Eastern Europe, especially as it makes its way over to like way Eastern Europe, modern day Russia, and in the South. And the reason that it lags in development in the South and in the East is because of traditional ways of life. So it's not supported by the monarch, or there's still a reliance on serfdom or unfavorable geography. All of those things limit industrialization's spread throughout the southern part of Europe and the eastern part of Europe. And that's important because the countries that industrialize become the strongest and the most powerful. We definitely see that with Britain, with Prussia, not as much with the Netherlands, but that's also because they're very small. But, they do kind of imperialize before anyone else does. But we'll get there next unit. I need you to draw this in your notes right now. If we're looking at political effects of the Industrial Revolution, we need to talk about the isms, but I don't always know that people understand what the isms are or these new ideologies that emerge. So I need you to literally draw this number line in your notes. And just left of center, you have the liberals. Just right of center, you have the conservatives. And then far left, you have radicals. Far right, you have reactionaries. And this number line, whatever we want to call this line that I have, represents the desire for change. So if you are in the middle, if you're moderate, you're like, meh, whatever, I'm right here. If you are a liberal, you want change. Maybe not like a ton of it, but like you want things to be different than the way that they are. And then if you keep walking this way, if you keep walking to the left, you're like, everything's terrible. Everything the way that it is right now is awful. We need to upend everything. Radical revolutionary change. Meanwhile, if you're going on the other side of the number line, moderate, got some conservatives, you're like, I think that we should just like stay the way that we are. I think that we should maintain the status quo. Conservatives are all about keeping things the way that they are. They want to maintain social hierarchies. They want to maintain economic practices. They do not want change in the way that liberals and radicals do. And reactionaries are like, whoa. Everything used to be way better like 500 years ago. Let's go back to what it way used to be like. We've already had too much change. We need to go way back to the good old days. Hopefully that helps you understand that like liberals want change, conservatives want to keep things the same, and then you have people kind of extending out on either end of that. Another ism that emerges is nationalism, except for this isn't new to this time period. This is a continuity in European history for a lot of European history. This nationalism emerges as a result of the Napoleonic Wars when Napoleon, tried to take over the continent. But It also emerges as like pride in one's country, yes. But then you have minority groups in countries that are like, do I do I really want to be part of this empire anymore? Or should I be able to create and form my own empire or my own country? So nationalism exists in both of those ways. In Russia, after this is like the late 1800s, um, so this is like slightly out of this time period, which is oh no, it's not because we're in a new time period. Sorry, everyone, I'm a little all over the place today. Thanks for tracking with me. So Russia realizes after a couple of specific events that again, it is not keeping up with its Western European contemporaries, which is like the story of Russia, right? Peter the Great is like, we are lagging behind Western Europe. We must modernize and westernize. Catherine the Great continues that. We see that also happen with the Russian Tsar at the time, Alexander II. He says, "Ooh, yeah, Russia's like real far behind what everything that's happening in Western Europe. We need to make sure that we are modernizing and that we were building up industry and infrastructure." He does this through his finance minister, whose name is Sergei Witt. I just like saying that name a lot. And ultimately, the first Russian Revolution happens in 1905, and it was a workers' revolt against the Tsar at the time. Put a pin in that. We'll get back to it when we talk about Unit 8. But this idea of nationalism, pride in one's country, and desire for change, right, liberalism, led to revolts across the continent. I have this map here that shows you a lot of the revolts that happened in the 1800s in Europe. People start joining together to fight for change, generally speaking, against the dominant power within their country. Mass-based political parties emerge in order to reflect the rights of the people or what the people want. This is closely tied with labor unions. So if we're looking at Britain, early labor unions, right, people who are fighting for more power and more rights within their factories, gain more power and start to consolidate and start to actually turn into their own political party. Great example of this is the Chartists. The Chartists are a group of men in England who emerge as a result of a labor union and then also start to ask for radical things like what I have on here, suffrage. That means that men specifically, not yet women, but men want all men should have the right to vote, not just kind of like the elite upper class men. Another ism that emerges is anarchism, which is just like, hey, government's unnecessary. Let's just all be happy together. Ooh, we're looking at economic effects of the Industrial Revolution. Socialism emerges. So the Industrial Revolution and its capitalist practices created an unequal division of wealth in society. That is not inherently a bad thing, but it was quite exacerbated in the short term. So you have the factory owners who are controlling all of the wealth and they just own the factories. And then you have maybe like your middle class emerging of like shopkeepers, managers, engineers, people who help make things for the factories. And then you have the majority of the people in the lower class, and they're the working class. They're these factory workers who don't have a lot of rights, don't have a lot of political power, and definitely don't have a lot of money. So socialism emerges as a new philosophy that would bring about more equality. Rather than the wealth division looking like this, maybe we can get the wealth division to look more like this. So there's more, socialism requires more government intervention in policies in order to bring about that wealth equality. That itself will lead to revolutions around the world. Other social effects of the Industrial Revolution is that, like I mentioned, there are kind of clear class distinctions that emerge. You have a very clear upper class of factory workers, and they show off the fact that they are an upper class of factory workers through philanthropic efforts, through parties that they like to throw, through the clothes that they wear. You have an emerging middle class, the bourgeoisie, that is also trying to distinguish themselves from the lower class. So they're like, whoa, we might not be up here. Might not be the upper class, but like, we're not these workers anymore. Like we have a pretty good standard of living and we want to show off that we have that pretty good standard of living. And then everyone else emerges in that proletariat, that working class. As these social hierarchies become more defined So like you are very aware of what kind of social rung you've fallen into in society. Whenever we see that happen, we tend to see women's roles change the most in the elite classes. So rather, in order to distinguish that you are a part of the bourgeoisie or that you're part of this like very elite upper class, you need to be able to consolidate your property, and you need to make sure that your property, that your wife or the woman in your household is taking care of everything, and that also means that she oftentimes has to be caged into certain societal roles. So this is where we see this cult of domesticity arise, which is just like ways that women need to act. And by that I mean women need to be responsible, devoted, devout housewives and serve only their husbands and only go outside when like the husbands allow them to, because they're responsible for taking care of the home, for cooking, for cleaning, and for taking care of the kids. We do not see that emerge in the lower class. That emerges in the bourgeoisie and like the elite classes. Because in the lower class, women are probably be in the factories still trying to help their family out. So we see a restriction in women's roles in the upper class as a result of the Industrial Revolution, but not necessarily in the lower class yet. Also, because of the Industrial Revolution, everyone's moving to the cities to get jobs, which leads to a lot of problems like sanitary problems, crime, prostitution, things that, again, local governments just need to learn to deal with. So while the short-term impacts of the Industrial Revolution are really bad, like when it first happens, things are so unequal right away, and the workers are so oppressed and like have no money at all compared to the people who own the factories. Over time, it actually does get better, right? Labor unions join together and they start to fight for working hours and livable wages. So working hours get cut from like 16 hours a day to 10 hours a day to eventually 8 hours a day. And they fight for more wages. So now that you're making more of a living wage, you now have kind of free time in a way that you didn't have before because you're only working in your factory for 8 to 10 hours. Also, you kind of have a disposable income, which means that you kind of have free time now. And with that free time, you can do cool things like play sports or go to the theater or go to the opera or go to parks and do leisure activities. So eventually that becomes good. Also, the fact that work and labor is now done by machines means that slavery is going to end soon, right? Like, yes, there were abolitionists who wanted to end slavery prior to the Industrial Revolution, but now that the Industrial Revolution has happened, there's like no real need to keep slavery around anymore. It is no coincidence that Britain is the first modern Western European country to ban slavery in the early 1800s. And eventually there are these reforms to modernize infrastructure, right? There was so much pollution as a result of this urbanization and overcrowding in factories. And over time that gets better. So local governments step in and say, we need to address kind of this unsanitary stuff that we created. Let's modernize our infrastructure. Let's make sure that we are building buildings and sewers and railways that are actually supporting the amount of people who live in our cities now. Ooh, I'm gonna have time for talking. Yay. Okay. Or questions at the end. So socially, the Industrial Revolution created an incredible amount of problems early on, but those issues led to reformers stepping in, eventually leading to an overall higher quality of life for most. Women's roles changed as upper class women have more restrictions placed on them, and feminists started to fight for legal and economic rights. Slavery was abolished across the continent by the late 1800s. Politically, labor unions turned into political parties in order to fight for economic, social, and sometimes legal rights for workers. The disenfranchised rebelled against the ruling class with liberal revolts, leading to the reinvigoration of conservatism and adherence to traditional values by many European leaders. So 1848, if I'm going back to this map here, which I will do very briefly, 1848 is sometimes called the springtime of the peoples, which I love that phrase so much, because it is in 1848 that all of these revolutions occur in Europe. And they are all these liberal revolts against traditional conservative values, traditional conservative political structures and economic structures. They're ultimately not super successful, which leads to, again, a wave of conservatism because you have these monarchs or these people with power in Europe who are like, What's happening? Why are these educated people revolting against us? They need to not do that anymore. So we see this respond with a wave of conservatism. But that will eventually change when we start to see when the Crimean War happens and then Italy and Germany unify in the next unit. And oh, great. Economically, I mean, if I'm going to throw that out there, the Industrial Revolution happens and that changes everything. Great. Here are your must-knows for Unit 5. So what I would do right now if I were you, sorry that some of these things are misspelled. What I would do right now if I were you is go grab your phone, which hopefully you threw across the room, and I would take a picture of this, or I would just make sure that you have these things written down somewhere. Because this is exactly what you need to know according to the CED, the course and exam description. This is just Unit 5. I'll show you Unit 6 on the next page. I've talked about all of these things, but if there's anything you need me to clarify right now, let me know. Methodism is a new Protestant denomination that focuses on like a personal, emotional, spiritual connection with God. So that is a good reminder of like Romanticism, right? Romanticism is this idea that you should rely on your emotions. We should actually care about what we feel and not just think cold, hard facts all the time. So Methodism was a way to like a new Protestant denomination that formed as a result of that. Liberal and radical phase. Yes. So liberal phase of the French Revolution is the first phase in which the French revolutionaries are actually successful in what they intended to do. They forced King Louis XVI to sign a document that makes France a constitutional monarchy. They nationalize the Catholic Church, so they limit the power of the Catholic Church, and they limit some privileges that the nobility in France had before. Radical phase is when everyone dies. Radical phase is like, cool, we did the thing that we wanted to do, but that wasn't enough. Let's make sure that we just like destroy every aspect of the ancien regime. Let's destroy every aspect of this old way of living. Let's kill Marie Antoinette. Let's kill Louis XVI. Let's behead anyone who speaks out against the revolution. Let's get rid of anything to do with the Catholic Church because it has oppressed us for so long. Yeah, so I would say like the first phase is successful in that the first phase gets rid of the monarchy and like kind of controls the Catholic Church a bit more, which were two of their big qualms. And then the radical phase is when everything just goes unhinged. Mass conscription was not for the 7 Years' War because the 7 Years' War happened before this. Mass conscription was trying to like bring these French revolutionary ideals to other countries in Europe. You know, I don't know. I don't know enough about Methodism to answer that question. Lutheranism is going to be like the closest to Catholicism, right? As like a new church practice because it was like the first really to branch away. But I don't know like differences in doctrine between Lutherans and Methodists. Ooh, yes, this person, reactionaries. So like if we're looking back on that number line that I had you write down, you have like liberals and you have radicals, and then you have conservatives and reactionaries. Reactionaries are like on like a way far extreme version of conservatives. They're like, we had it better hundreds of years ago. We need to go back to the way things were before, versus like we need to keep things are the way they are now. The Industrial Revolution, yeah, ended slavery. That is an easy way to think about that. Because again, you don't need people doing the labor if you now have machines to do the labor for you. Abolitionist movements had existed for a long time. I will not diminish the work that abolitionists did. But once more countries had industrialized, they were like, yeah, we don't need these enslaved people anymore. I'm going to go to the next must know. So Unit 5. This is Unit 6. There we go. It's a lot. I would just de-Christianization in the radical phase. I would love to. So Jacques-René Hébert was the guy who spearheaded de-Christianization, and he thought that the Catholic Church had oppressed the people of France for so long and led to like such strict kind of legalist rules in France that he wanted nothing to do with it anymore. So whereas the moderate phase of the French Revolution said, yeah, like they're now going to be kind of checked, so they're going to be under the power of us. Jacques-René Hébert was like, that's not enough. Religion is terrible. Look at all the problems that it has caused. We need to completely remove any vestiges of Christianity or the Catholic Church in France. Because, I mean, if you look back at French history, the French wars of religion, right? Like it's easy maybe for him to draw this conclusion. So he abolishes like the Catholic Church. I think they seize a bunch of church lands. They create a new calendar. They like no one's allowed to practice their faith openly and out in public, or else they're like opponents of the revolution. What term is my video blocking? That's a great question. Let's see. Oh, compulsory education. That is another thing that is tied in. So let me actually go through some of these because I didn't cover all of them. Compulsory education, which is what my face is blocking right now, is tied in with this rise of nationalism. So now that the average populace is literate, now that especially as a result of the Industrial Revolution, kind of the wealthier people are sending their kids to schools, it is required to send your kids to schools. And it's in these schools that they're learning things like, I don't know, pride in your country, thinking that your country is better than other countries, thinking that your race or that your culture is better than other races or cultures. I wonder what that's gonna do. The Russian Revolution in 1905 was in part due to the Russo-Japanese War. I didn't talk about that at all, but you should high five yourself for knowing that. Way to go. Teddy Roosevelt won a Nobel Prize because of his the way that he helped end the Russo-Japanese War, which also led to, this disgruntled group of workers who have no rights. And they're like, hey, didn't France have a revolution like 100 years ago? Should we also do something like that and overthrow the Tsar? Great. Key features to look for when trying to differentiate romantic art compared to other art. What I would tell you here is look at whenever you're given an image on your AP test, you are going to be given the source. So I would just look at like key romantic artists and I would look at the time period, because I mean, I can say like it's based on feeling. That can mean a lot of things when you're looking at art. But if it's something that emerges in the 1700s or through the 1800s, so really like from the Enlightenment to the Industrial Revolution, so like literally, like 1750s to 1850s, that's going to tend to be romantic. And then if you can know people like Jacques-Louis David, if you can know people like Caspar David Friedrich, if you can know people like J.M.W. Turner, that would help you just kind of like immediately trigger, ooh, these are romantic artists. Okay, sorry, let me go through these things really quickly and then I'll answer all your questions. So talked about the Industrial Revolution, nice. Capitalist funding from people in parliament. They're reinvesting back in their industry in order to progress it faster. New banking policies start to emerge because companies start to like monopolize industry. Longer life expectancy because people, with the Industrial Revolution actually comes a lot of medical benefits. You can now mass produce medicine. So people start to live longer as a result of that. Consumerism is encouraged through mass marketing and through advertisements. Prussia becomes industrialized. They start to lead and industrialize what becomes Germany. Concert of Europe, or the Congress system, I didn't directly state, but that is when these conservative leaders, led by Clemens von Metternich, after the Napoleonic Wars, start to say, ooh, we need to just like make sure that like traditional conservative values reign supreme. So it is these European leaders working together to try to keep that in line. And then these revolutions of 1848, the springtime of the peoples, break apart that Congress of Europe because so many people across the continent are disgruntled with the status quo, right? They're disgruntled with conservatism. So Congress of Europe, concert system, same thing. It just is like these traditional conservative leaders working together to try to maintain the status quo. People are like, no, I'm not going to do that. They have all these revolutions in 1848 that leads to the breakdown of the concert of Europe. Reform in Russia, right, to try to modernize them. Russian Revolution does happen, the first one in 1905, as a result of the Russo-Japanese War, and as a result of like the fact that Russia was so far behind its contemporaries in Western Europe, and they hadn't modernized, they hadn't industrialized. Liberals, radicals, socialists. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. You should know who that is. Mass-based political parties, labor unions. Feminists start to emerge in this unit. I mean, they've emerged for all of history. But they're like, hey, so like average men can maybe get some political power. Can like we also get a say? And the majority of people in Europe are like, no, not yet. Not yet. Okay, now I can answer all your questions. Baroque art and Mannerist art. Oh, wait, but that's true, Quandra. When you think of, I don't ever think of like Baroque art. I tend to think of Baroque architecture. And I think that that is maybe a helpful distinguishing factor. Baroque architecture is like, let's show off to the world how wealthy and powerful we are, whether I'm a monarch, whether I'm a Catholic church, whatever it is. Let's just show off how much money we have and make everything as beautiful as possible. Versailles, great example of Baroque architecture. If you see like the Hall of Mirrors, that's insane. That is so Baroque. Mannerist is paintings that are dark and gloomy and emo. So hopefully maybe that helps distinguish it a little bit. Cool, we have a minute left. This was a ton. I know it was a ton. I'm sorry I went through that pretty quickly. Hopefully this helped a little bit. Oh, a majority of feminists are going to be, well, that's a great question. Because, I mean, the records that we have tend to be from women in the middle and upper classes. Does that mean that lower class feminists did not exist? Absolutely not. We just don't necessarily have a history that supports that. So yeah, I got like 30 seconds left. I will be back on Wednesday, same time, same place, to talk about units 7 and 8. Unit 7 is one of my favorite units. And then unit 8, of course, is going to be like world wars. So I hope to see you then. Okay, bye.